I gotta give you a heads up. This story has a really graphic and disturbing twist at the end, so just be advised. Morgantown, West Virginia is this really beautiful town, sort of tucked away at the foot of the Green Mountains. It's a huge college town. I mean, that's where the famous West Virginia University Island. So during the school year, the place is just packed with young people, and during football season, the whole town is absolutely electric. But the college isn't the only reason people decide to live in Morgantown. A lot of families actually choose to live there because there's so much to do all year round. It's also pretty safe, and generally it's this up and coming place with new shops and restaurants and museums opening up every single year. But for all of that, Morgantown is also known for something just awful. And that is the story of Skyler Neese. Quick thing before we start, where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? What's the weather like? And tell me, what case do you want next? Leave it in the comments. I go through every one. Make sure you're subscribed. Let's go. Back in 2012, 16-year-old Skyler Neese was a sophomore in high school there in Morgantown. She was a straight-A student, and she also had a part-time job at a Wendy's. And from everything people said, she was just incredibly well-liked by her classmates and coworkers. She had tons of friends. She was the only child of Mary and David Neese, and they just absolutely worshipped her. Her dad, David, who was this big, burly, man's man type, he'd even admit that he spoiled his daughter, completely rotten. Her parents said she was just full of love and life, fiercely loyal, and sometimes she could be absolutely hilarious. Dave had this one memory he loved to tell from when Skyler was a little girl, and he was home looking after her by himself. That morning, she asked him if he'd join her for one of her famous tea parties. So David, being the great dad he was, walks right over and tells her of course he'll play. He sits down in this tiny little pink chair, and his daughter, who's wearing her ballerina tutu, is sitting across from him in her own little chair, just smiling from ear to ear. She hands him this little plastic teacup, and he sees there's already water in it. So he takes a sip of the tea and tells her how good it is, what a great job she did brewing it. And Skyler was just beaming, so happy and thrilled that he liked it. Later that evening, when Mary got home from work, she asked her husband how the day with Skyler went. And Dave told her all about it, including the big tea party. He mentioned to Mary that this time, Skyler had even put actual water in the teacup, so it felt like a real tea party. And Mary just sort of stops him and says, "Dave, Skyler isn't tall enough to reach the sink faucet. How could she have gotten water in those cups?" And it turned out, yeah, Skyler had been using water from the toilet to fill the teacups. So, fast forward to 2012. On the night of July 5th, 16-year-old Skyler Neese had just gotten home from her shift at Wendy's. She came in through the front door of her family's apartment, and right away she told her parents she was exhausted and just wanted to go to bed. So she hugged both of them, told them she loved them, and then Mary and Dave watched as their daughter walked down the first floor hallway, opened her bedroom door, went inside, and shut it behind her. The next morning, Mary and Dave both had to work, so they were up early, but Skyler wasn't. Her bedroom door was still closed, so they just assumed she was sleeping in. Mary and Dave made breakfast, chatted, and went about their morning routine. And when it was time for them to leave for work, they decided not to bother Skyler. She'd worked late, let her sleep. And so her parents left that morning without seeing or speaking to her. Later that afternoon, Dave got home from work a little early. He walked into the apartment and it was just quiet. Mary was still at work, but Skyler really shouldn't have still been asleep at this point. I mean, it was like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, so he figured she had to be up and around somewhere. He called out for his daughter, asking where she was and what she was doing, but nothing, just silence. So he walked down the hallway toward his daughter's room and saw the door was still shut. Now, she really only ever kept her door closed when she was sleeping, so he's thinking, okay, I guess she must still be asleep. This is seriously late in the day, though. So he decided to knock and check on her. He knocked on the door and called out, "Hey, Sky, it's late in the afternoon, you gotta get up." But there was no answer. And when he put his ear to the door, he couldn't hear any noise coming from inside the room. He thought that was pretty strange. He knocked a few more times and called out for her again, but when there was still no response, no sound at all, he opened the door. And when he looked inside, Skyler wasn't there. Now, Dave was thinking, I really don't think my daughter told me she was going anywhere today. He was trying to rack his brain. Did she mention meeting up with someone? Did she say anything? But he couldn't think of a thing, so he just pulled out his phone and called his daughter. She didn't pick up. So he called his wife, Mary, who was at work. Mary answered, and Dave asked her if she'd seen Skyler or had any idea where she might be. She told him no, she didn't know, and figured maybe she was just out with one of her friends. After Dave got off the phone with his wife, he decided to call one of Skyler's best friends. Her name was Sheila. She and Skyler had been friends since second grade. They were practically inseparable, and he had a pretty good relationship with her. So he calls Sheila and just explains, hey, I haven't seen Skyler. She's not here. Do you have any idea where she is? Sheila told him, no, I'm sorry, I don't. She said she'd talked to her last night, but there was nothing unusual about it. They were just texting about normal things. And so Dave said, okay, thank you, and asked if she could please try to get in touch with Skyler. And if she did, to please tell her to get in touch with them. After Dave hung up with Sheila, he just kind of stopped and looked around his daughter's bedroom, thinking maybe there was some clue in there as to where she'd gone. At first glance, nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. But then, as he walked around her bed and looked over towards her closet, he saw the mesh screen, the one that should have been mounted on the outside of her window, was sitting there inside her closet. And his first thought is, why is that in there? The screen being in the closet made absolutely zero sense. So on pure instinct, he turns and heads directly to the window it belonged to. That's when he notices the window isn't fully shut. There's a tiny gap at the very bottom, just big enough that a person could wedge their fingers underneath and slide it open. So Dave does just that, reaching down and pushing the window all the way up. With the screen gone, the opening was completely unobstructed, so he leaned his head entirely outside of the apartment. He's just scanning the area, trying to find any possible reason for the screen to have been removed and stashed in the closet. He found his answer when he glanced straight down at the ground below. A bench was sitting in the grass, positioned directly beneath the window, and it was glaringly obvious that it had been moved there, and very recently. For Dave, this was just unreal. He had never, not once, known Skyler to sneak out of the house, and he genuinely didn't believe it was in her character to do something like that. But now, looking at the evidence, the screen in the closet, the bench under the window, it all pointed to one unavoidable conclusion. She must have climbed out of her room the night before. But as he's wrapping his head around that, another wave of questions hits him. Okay, so if she snuck out and then came back in, why wouldn't she have replaced the screen? Why would she leave the window unlatched? And this morning, before heading out again, why on earth wouldn't she move the bench back where it belongs to cover her tracks? It made no sense. And that's when the truly awful realization washed over him. His daughter snuck out last night, but she never snuck back in. She was still out there wherever she'd gone. Dave was deeply concerned, but he was also trying to tell himself that maybe there was another explanation, that maybe he was just jumping to the worst possible conclusion. He called his wife Mary to talk through everything and decide what their next step should be. Together, they agreed that while the situation was alarming, they should just wait a couple of hours and see if she turned up. They tried to reassure themselves that she was fine. So, that's what they did. They waited. Then, at 4 p.m. that evening, the phone rang. It was the manager from Wendy's, where Skyler worked. The manager was calling to ask Dave if he'd seen Skyler, explaining that she was scheduled for a shift that day but never arrived. She hadn't even called to say she'd be out. The manager kept saying how bizarre this was, how it was totally unlike her. For Dave and Mary, that was it. That was the tipping point. They knew in that moment that something was terribly wrong. So Dave called the police. He explained to the 911 dispatcher that his 16-year-old daughter was missing.
I have a daughter that's 16 years old. Apparently she snuck out of her room last night and she hasn't been seen since. None of her friends can get a hold of her. I can't find her.
Hey, what's her name?
Skyler Nee.
He told them about the evidence suggesting she'd slipped out of her room the previous night, that she hadn't come home, had missed work, and that none of her friends had been able to reach her. He told them flat out that he was scared to death. When asked if she'd ever done this before, his answer was immediate: no, never. After he got off the phone, he and Mary were in a total panic, frantically trying to figure out what they were supposed to do. Should they be out there looking for her while the police did their own search? Or did they need to stay at the apartment in case she came back, maybe hurt and needing their help? It was in the middle of this agonizing debate that Mary's cell phone started ringing. The caller ID showed it was Sheila. Mary answered instantly, desperate for some kind of good news. But the first thing Sheila asked was whether Skyler had made it home yet. Mary had to tell her no, she hadn't, and that things were so bad they had already called the police. Hearing that the police were now involved seemed to change everything for Sheila. She took a moment, and after a brief hesitation, she told Mary that she needed to tell her the real story about the previous night. Sheila proceeded to explain that, yes, Skyler had snuck out, but so had she, and so had their other close friend, a girl named Rachel, whom Mary and Dave also knew quite well. The three of them were an inseparable trio. Sheila confessed that sneaking out was something they did frequently. They would meet up, drive around, and smoke marijuana together. But as stunning as that revelation was for Mary and Dave, it wasn't the most important part. The crucial detail was the specific method they used. They had a rule: whoever was driving was forbidden from ever pulling the car up directly in front of anyone's house. They were paranoid that the sound of the engine would wake up their parents. So, their system was to first sneak out on foot, walk a block or two away to a prearranged spot, and only then call or text for their ride. Drop-offs worked the same way, just in reverse. And so, Sheila told Mary that last night, following their usual routine, she had let Skyler out of the car about a block away from the niece's apartment. And after that, Sheila and Rachel just drove away. So, the implication here is that they never actually saw Skyler walk into her building. They had no idea if she ever made it home safely. For Mary and Dave, this was an absolutely horrifying thought because it created this terrible window of time where their daughter could have been abducted while walking from the car back to her apartment. And the street she was walking on was not well lit. I mean, it's the middle of the night, it's pitch black. She was also potentially high on marijuana. So the possibility that something awful happened to her in that short walk, as horrifying as it was, it seemed terrifyingly realistic. So as soon as Mary hung up with Sheila, she called the police back and told them everything Sheila had just revealed. After that, Mary and Dave met up with Sheila and her mother, and the four of them started searching the immediate area around the apartment. They were hoping that maybe, Skyler had fallen somewhere or gotten stuck and just needed help. But after hours of searching and knocking on what felt like hundreds of doors, nothing. Nobody had seen anything. Nobody knew anything. There was just no sign of Skyler anywhere, and the group was just completely demoralized. They felt totally and utterly helpless. They knew the police were out there looking, but they were desperate to do something themselves. They just didn't know what. And that's when Mary suddenly remembered the security camera on the outside of their apartment building, the one pointed down at the road. And right away, the four of them literally ran back to the apartment building. They rushed inside, found the security manager, and quickly explained the situation. And sure enough, he pulled up the security footage from the night before. And what they saw on the video, it didn't make any sense. Sheila's story about dropping Skyler off near the corner, just out of the camera's view around midnight, seemed to be true. But then at 12:30 a.m., a full 30 minutes after she was supposedly dropped off, a totally different, generic-looking car pulls up right in front of the apartment complex. And that's when you see Skyler come running across the lawn, go directly to this car, open the back door, and hop into the back seat. She shuts the door, and the car just drives away. Now, even though this didn't solve the mystery, they had no idea whose car this was, who was driving it, or where it was headed. Mary and Dave actually felt a wave of relief. Because from their perspective, it looked like their daughter got into that vehicle on her own accord. Whoever it was, whatever they were doing, she seemed to go willingly, which to them meant she probably wasn't being abducted. And that had been their absolute biggest fear. Over the next few days, the police tried to analyze the footage to get any information about the car, but the quality was so grainy they couldn't get anything from it. The police, though, were telling Dave and Mary, look, I'm sure Skyler will turn up any day now. As much as you don't want to believe your daughter would do this, it's pretty common for teenagers to run away. They said they often disappear for a few days and then just pop back up, and they were sure that's what was happening with Skyler. They stressed that she chose to get in that car, so she would probably choose to get back in touch when she was ready. So a couple days went by, and the parents heard nothing from their daughter. Then a couple of weeks went by, still nothing. And then a couple of months. All of this was happening while a massive search was going on led by the police, and local residents in Morgantown had put flyers with Skyler's face on them everywhere. You couldn't go 5 feet in that town or any of the neighboring towns without being reminded that this girl was missing. But despite how much publicity the case was getting, no one came forward with a single piece of useful information. It was as if Skyler had just vanished off the face of the earth and nobody had a clue what happened. Her parents were obviously devastated, but they were still trying to hold on to that idea that maybe she did run away, and maybe eventually she would contact them. But by December of that year, 6 months after Skyler had gone missing, no one had heard from her, no one had seen her, and there were no new leads. People were starting to lose hope, and the case was beginning to go cold. And then on December 12th, something completely unexpected happened that changed absolutely everything. On that night, Rachel, the other friend who was with Sheila and Skyler the night she vanished, had a full-blown nervous breakdown. It was so bad that she was reportedly screaming, running around, and punching her own family members. Her mother actually had to call the police on her, telling the dispatcher she couldn't control her 16-year-old daughter anymore, that she was just screaming and running through the neighborhood. After that call, police showed up at Rachel's house and took her to a psychiatric hospital. Several days after she was released, she walked straight into the Morgantown Police Department. She told them, "I gotta get something off my chest about Skyler." Apparently, whatever it was she'd been keeping secret had become too much for her to handle. It was quite literally driving her insane. So the police said, "Okay, great," and brought her into an interview room. They sat her down and said, "Okay, what do you have for us?" The story that follows is based on what Rachel told the police. Back on July 5th, 2012, Skyler got home from her night shift at Wendy's. She went inside, said goodnight to her parents, went into her bedroom, shut the door, and was just laying on her bed on her phone, not quite ready to sleep. And as she's lying there, she starts getting text messages from Rachel and also from Sheila asking her if she wants to sneak out that night. Now, Skyler didn't want to go, and she told them that mainly because she was hurt. She was mad at her two friends. According to some of their other friends from school, while the three of them had been inseparable, there had been a lot of tension in their group in the months leading up to her disappearance. It seemed like Sheila and Rachel were getting extremely close and were starting to push Skyler away, and Skyler was picking up on it. It was little things. Sheila and Rachel would show up to school in matching outfits, but wouldn't tell Skyler beforehand, leaving her out. Or whenever they posted selfies of the three of them, Skyler was always kind of relegated to the back or obscured in some way to make sure she wasn't the focus. It was just really obvious they were deprioritizing her, and it was really hurting her feelings. And so it seemed like her way of standing up to them, of telling them she was upset, was to turn down their offer to sneak out and smoke with them. But over the next couple of hours, they kept texting her, and Skyler eventually said, "Okay, fine, I'll come with you guys. I'll sneak out and we'll go smoke together." Just before 12:30 a.m. on July 6th, Skyler gets off her bed. She walks to her window, lifts it up, and pulls the screen off. She takes the screen over to her closet, puts it inside, and shuts the closet door. Then she goes back to the window, crawls out, and lowers herself down onto the grass below. After that, she grabs a bench, slides it over, and puts it right underneath her window. Then she stands on the bench, reaches up, and pulls the window down until there's just that little crack left so she could get back inside. And then she just waited by the side of the apartment, looking out towards the road. And right after 12:30, this car, the unknown car from the surveillance video, pulls right up in front of the building. And Skyler runs over to it, opens up the back right door, and climbs inside. This unknown car was Sheila's car. Sheila was driving, and Rachel was in the front passenger seat. It would turn out Rachel and Sheila had lied about basically everything, including the actual time they picked Skyler up. So the three girls drive away from Skyler's apartment, and Sheila gets on the highway heading northwest. The plan wasn't to smoke in the car. Instead, they decided they would drive to a specific spot, get out, and smoke there. The place they chose was a location they'd been to before. It was a known hangout for teenagers located about a 45-minute drive away, just barely across the state line into Pennsylvania. It was down a kind of old forgotten country road that nobody ever really used. So Sheila drives for 45 minutes, crosses into Pennsylvania, and finds the turnoff for this old road. They go down it for a little ways until they're pretty far from the highway, at which point Sheila pulls the car off onto the grass and parks. The three of them get out and walk a bit past the car, down a path to a clearing on their right. There was a hill there that went up, and their routine was to sit on the side of this hill, looking down. And so the three girls sit down, all right next to each other, facing downhill, not facing one another. Sheila, who is sitting on the far right, with the car off to their left, pulls out a marijuana joint. She goes to light it, but then announces she doesn't have a lighter. She asks Rachel and Skyler if either of them has one. They both pat down their pockets, check themselves. No lighter. And then Sheila turns to Skyler, who's sitting on the far left of the line. So Skyler's the one closest to the car. Sheila asks her, "Hey, can you go back to the car and get the lighter I know is in there?" And Skyler said it was no problem. So Skyler stands up and turns around. Her back is now facing her two friends. And as soon as she starts to walk away, she would have heard the sound of both of them standing up right behind her and then loudly counting in unison. 1, 2, 3. And on the word 3, Skyler would have felt 2 knives. One from Rachel, one from Sheila, plunge into her back. In a total panic, Skyler doesn't even try to turn around. She just takes off running back towards the car and actually manages to get away from them for a moment. But because of the grievous injuries in her back, she eventually starts to slow down, which is when Sheila tackles her from behind. She gets Skyler on the ground, pinning her on her back. Sheila's trying to stab her again, but Skyler's doing everything she can to fight her off. But then Rachel runs up next to them, and between the two of them, they manage to overpower Skyler and hold her hands down. At that point, the whole time Skyler's trying to defend herself, but it's just impossible with both of them on top of her. And at some point, she just seems to give up, and she just asks them, "Why are you doing this to me? Why?" But they don't give her a reason. They just keep going. Eventually, Rachel stops stabbing her. Sheila stood up as if nothing had happened. She and Rachel just calmly walked away from her body and back to the car. They went around to the trunk, opened it up, and inside was a kill kit. Shovels, bleach, trash bags, rags. They had brought it all with them because they knew what they were going to do this night. So they start by cleaning themselves off, getting the blood off their bodies and their weapons. Then they take the shovels and walk a little ways into the woods off the road and try to dig a grave. But it turned out the ground was just too hard and rocky. So they abandoned that idea and instead just grabbed Skyler's lifeless body and dragged it about 6 feet off the road, kind of chucking it up against the log. And then they just started throwing boulders and sticks and anything they could find on top of her body until she was totally obscured. After she was covered, the two girls just walked back. They grabbed their shovels, their rags, their bleach, put it all back in the trunk. They got in their car and they just drove away. It would later come out that Rachel and Sheila had been planning this for months. The reason? They just didn't like Skyler anymore. And apparently, it wasn't enough to just be cruel to her and exclude her from things. They actually felt they needed to kill her. The entire night was a setup. They knew Skyler was upset with them and didn't want to sneak out, so they just said whatever they needed to say to convince her to leave her house, and she did. She snuck out. And when she got in that car, both Sheila and Rachel already had their knives hidden in the front pockets of their sweatshirts ready to go. And on the ride to the spot in Pennsylvania, they acted like it was just a normal night. But this was also planned. They wanted to make sure they were far away from Morgantown when they killed her. And when they got there and walked to their spot, Sheila and Rachel had intentionally not brought lighters. Sheila had left one in the car specifically so she could ask Skyler to go get it. The plan all along was that as soon as Skyler got up to get that lighter and her back was to them, they had promised each other they would count to 3 and then attack. Ultimately, Rachel would be sentenced to 30 years in prison, but she became eligible for parole in 2023. Sheila was sentenced to life in prison, but she will also be eligible for parole in 2028. During their trials, Rachel appeared very remorseful and even gave an apology to Skyler's parents during her sentencing.
I'm so sorry. I don't know if there's a proper way to make this apology because there are not even words to describe the guilt and remorse that I feel each day for what I've done. The person that did that was not the real me, not the person I am, not what I'm made of, and not what I believe in. I don't think I ever thought this would actually happen. I became scared and caught up in something that I did not want to do. I never realized the gravity of my actions and how many people I've hurt. I hurt the Neese family and those who love Skyler. I hurt my parents and shamed my family. I I hurt my extended family and all of my friends who loved me. I hurt my teachers and those who believed in me. I hurt my church family, my community, and those who trusted me. And I hurt my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. May God bring eternal peace to Skyler and the entire Niece family. Again, I'm so sorry, and I pray each day for everyone involved, and I pray each day for forgiveness.
Sheila, on the other hand, reportedly smirked through her trial. For most of it, she was smiling and seemed to be making light of the whole thing. She claimed she didn't do it, showed no remorse at all, and offered no apology to Skyler's parents.
Rachel Soph also murdered my daughter in cold blood. Skyler would not be where she was if it wasn't for Rachel Soph. You said yourself, Your Honor, this is first-degree murder. She should not give any leniency, and she can take her apologies and everything else and sit on them because that's about what they're worth to me and my wife. She has done nothing but make our lives a living hell since this day one. She did cooperate in the end because she knew that it was closing in on her, and yes, she would be caught. That's the only reason she feels remorse.
She did, however, leave an unbelievably cruel message on Twitter. In March of 2013, when the police officially announced that they had identified the remains in the Pennsylvania forest as belonging to Skyler Niece, just a couple of days after that announcement was made, Sheila tweeted, "We really did go on 3." Sheila was arrested 1 month later. So you're left looking at the wreckage of all this, trying to make some kind of sense out of something that is just fundamentally senseless. You look at the facts. 2 teenage girls planned for months to murder their best friend. And the only reason that ever came out was that they just didn't like her anymore. That's it. No big betrayal, no huge fight, no jealousy over a boy. They just decided they were done with her and that the only way to end the friendship was to end her life. It's a level of coldness that's hard to even process. It breaks your brain a little bit. When you dig into it, the core of this tragedy wasn't a sudden snap. It was a slow, toxic decay of what should have been a normal teenage friendship. The key factor here was the dehumanization of Skyler by her closest friends. It didn't happen overnight. It started with those small, cruel acts of exclusion, the matching outfits, being pushed to the back of photos, the whispers and inside jokes she wasn't a part of. To Rachel and Sheila, Skyler slowly stopped being a person, a friend with feelings, and became an inconvenience, an obstacle. Once you stop seeing someone as human, it becomes terrifyingly easier to justify doing inhuman things to them. They didn't just drift apart like normal friends do. They actively and methodically isolated her emotionally before they isolated her physically on that dirt road. That's the part that's so chilling. The murder was just the final step in a process of getting rid of her that had been going on for months. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of convenience, planned with the same casualness some teens might plan a weekend hangout. Look, there's no magic formula to prevent something this evil from happening. Sometimes, terrible people do terrible things, and there's nothing anyone could have done. But there are lessons here, especially for young people and for parents. Friendships shouldn't hurt. This sounds so simple, but it's everything. If your friends consistently make you feel small, left out, or worthless, they are not your friends. It's not just drama, it's a pattern of emotional abuse. Skyler knew she was being pushed out, she was hurt by it, and even tried to stand up for herself by initially refusing to go out with them. That feeling in her gut was a warning sign. Isolation is a weapon. If you notice your friends are systematically trying to cut you off from other people, or making your entire social world revolve only around them, that's a huge red flag. It's a way of gaining control. Healthy friendships encourage you to have other friends and interests. Toxic ones try to possess you. Your no should be respected. Skyler said no at first. They pressured her until she said yes. In any relationship, friendship or otherwise, someone who can't accept your boundaries is not safe. It shows they value their own wants far more than your comfort or safety. Know their friends, but really know them. It's not enough to just know their names. Mary and Dave knew who Sheila and Rachel were. They were constants in Skyler's life. But it's about observing the dynamics. Listen to the way your kid talks about their friends. Is it always full of anxiety? Do they seem drained or upset after hanging out? Emotional changes are a big deal. Skyler's parents knew she was loyal and loving. A change in that or a sudden withdrawal would have been a sign. If your outgoing, happy kid suddenly becomes secretive, moody, or isolated, it's easy to write it off as teenager stuff. But it can be a signal that something is seriously wrong in their social world. The problem is, kids are often programmed to hide this stuff from their parents, fearing they'll overreact or make it worse. Create a no judgment bailout plan. This is critical. Every family should have a system where a kid can text a code word or phrase and the parent will come get them, no questions asked at that moment. I need you to come get me means you go and you deal with the why later calmly. Knowing they have an unconditional escape route can be the difference between staying in a dangerous situation and getting out. The story of Skyler Neese is a brutal reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the person you text every day, the one you tell your secrets to. The betrayal is what makes this case so haunting. She wasn't killed by a stranger in the dark. She was killed by the two people she probably trusted most in the world, in a place where she felt safe. It's a testament to the absolute strength of Mary and Dave Neese that they fought so hard for justice and have worked to keep Skyler's memory alive through Skyler's Law, which reformed the Amber Alert system in West Virginia for missing children. They turned their unimaginable pain into something that could protect others. If you or someone you know is in a dangerous situation, feeling unsafe, or needs to talk to someone, please don't wait. Your life is precious. There are people who want to help you. The National Runaway Safe Line in the U.S. is available 24/7. You can call them at 1-800-RUNAWAY, 1-800-786-2929. You don't have to be a runaway to call. They help youth in any kind of crisis. It's confidential and it's free.